Not that anyone asked, but I have to use the handheld mic because if I use a lav mic, my beard gets all up in it and makes noises. So, and every audio guy I've ever worked with said, "Oh, we'll just clip it onto your beard." Nah, we're not doing that.
It is my honor to introduce to you Chef to talk about the whole is more dangerous than the sum of its parts, and anybody that runs any vulnerability exception process probably knows this pretty well. So, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Chef. Also go by Damon Small, and we're going to talk through an interesting attack chain that actually happened to me when I was on a job with a very large client. I can't talk about who the client was, but I think it's an interesting narrative, and we'll get into it. Let me start off by saying I'm originally from Louisiana. I've been living in Houston for the last 30 years, and it's great. This is my first time at BSidesPGH, so I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for having me. And I realize I'm competing against lunch, so I will make sure I make it worth your while. I've got a great employer and a great job and a great career, and my employer supports us, me and my colleagues, in being here and similar. I'm hoping to get another one. Yeah. So, but that having been said, I'm going to make you sit through a short commercial, and thanks to my employer. So I work for Blue Bastion. Blue Bastion is where our parent company is Ideal Integrations, that's based right here in Pittsburgh. A lot of us that work at Blue Bastion, some of us are here in Pittsburgh, and some of us are remote all over the place. So Blue Bastion, I'm not going to read that off to you, but check out our website. We provide blue team and red team services, as well as some advisory services. So thanks for letting me be here. I mentioned the vCISO and advisory services. That's the team that I work with mostly. We've got a variety of services that are very interesting, that are kind of holistic in nature, that include the business as well as the technology stack. And happy to talk more about that later. But anyway, again, shout out to my employer. Enough about that. Let's talk about me, my favorite topic. I've been in IT or InfoSec for about 30 years, like I said, in the Houston area. A lot of healthcare. And oil and gas. Those are the two largest industries in Southeast Texas. And so I've spent a lot of time working with those industries, as well as a little bit of aerospace. Johnson Space Center is down there in the Houston area. And, of course, consulting. So I've enjoyed that. I've sat on both sides of the table, right? I've been a blue teamer. I've been a red teamer. And I've also been very involved in the DEF CON community, if anyone's familiar with DEF CON. I've been a speaker there. I've been a shepherd, just like Dr. Chick, who we just heard, which, by the way, don't ever follow her. She's fantastic. I really enjoyed that slide deck, so I'm just going to try and keep up with her. So she and I met, actually, working with the Wall of Sheep and the Packet Hacking Village, and this year I'll be a goon. So if you come see us in Vegas and you see a guy that looks like me with a red shirt on, it's probably me doing the goon thing. Native of Louisiana, go Tigers. Any LSU fans here? Yeah, wrong state for that, right? Okay, that's fine. I got into tech while studying music at Louisiana State. Long story, but I'm still a frustrated musician. Now I'm a computer nerd. 30 years in Houston, like I said, and yes, I'm very happy to be here because Hurricane Beryl was a pain in the backside. That was not pleasant, and I've been through plenty of hurricanes, but I'm here. So anyway, that's me. Special thanks working with DEF CON and doing all those things. Well, thanks to Blue Bastion and Ideal Integrations, as I said. BSidesPGH, I know how much work goes into putting on a show like this. Thank you all. This is fantastic. It's great. Oh, and there's one of the organizers now. Oh, no. You going to kick me off already?
No, never. First-time speaker. So instead of making him drink a shot like they do at DEF CON, blinky cat ears. And there we go. And he has to wear them the whole time during his talk.
Okay. Thank you, Kat. How do I look? Is this good? All right. Q, I'm going to go ahead and wear this on our next client call, and I'll be sure to have my camera on. Yeah. All right. My wife, an editor. If any of you are content creators and you create content, you have to have a good editor. And I happen to marry mine. She does a very good job of going through my slide decks, making sure everything makes sense. She takes out the stupid dad jokes. I put them back in. That's just how it goes. And, of course, y'all are giving me the gift of your time being here today. I very much appreciate it. So thank y'all. If you read my abstract, you might have seen it. Basically, it's a complex chain of attack chain scenario to demonstrate how individual vulnerabilities themselves might not be damaging, but when you have enough of them chained together, you can go from these individual exploits that are kind of uninteresting to gradually elevating your privileges and eventually getting the keys to the kingdom. And if I do my job well, the point I'm trying to drive, I'm going to tell you now, the exciting ending. The lesson illustrates that managing risk is more complex than understanding the threat landscape, but rather understanding it in the context of the entire enterprise. And that the vCISO and advisory services that I work on, that's a big part of what we do, is understanding those threats and those vulnerabilities in the context. So what this presentation is and isn't, I'm going to talk about a lot of exploits and a lot of vulnerabilities. I'm intentionally not going to go into very, very low-level detail on how some of these exploits took place. I'm more interested in showing that because of one exploit, we got this level of access, and then we pivoted and found another vulnerability that we exploited, and so on and so on. So there's going to be some assumptions I'll make, but I'll do my best to explain things so it's relevant in that way. And also, there are some steps I'm going to skip over. So as Dr. Chick said when she was up here, sometimes when you're going through a narrative like this, time is compressed just a little bit. So I'll point that out. Here we are. Here's the TLDR on it. This is a recap, and I said this is an actual, and forgive me, folks, I tend to pace a lot when I'm on stage, so I'm going to do that. I'll do my best to not fall off. It was an 85-day engagement that took place in 4 business weeks. So 20 days that we had. We had multiple consultants working on it, so we were able to get 85 days of work done effectively in 20 days. On my team, I had a blue teamer, 3 red teamers, a systems architect, and a wireless engineer. Oftentimes when we engage in things, you think that, okay, this is not going to be successful unless we get domain admin, right? That is one goal, for sure, but all the steps that we took to get there tell an interesting story. So if you yourself are a consultant or a red teamer, pen tester, if you don't get DA, that doesn't mean that the engagement was not worthwhile, right? So I want to just emphasize that point. We tend to focus, it's easy to focus on individual attacks rather than the systemic issues that led them to exist. So as we go through this narrative, you'll see sometimes it was technical issues, vulnerable software or misconfigured software. Sometimes human error was involved. Somebody on the client side made a mistake, and we use that to our advantage. The result of this engagement, when we were done with the readout and everybody was fine, our client contact said, this is going to take us about 3 years to fix all this stuff that you guys found. Breaking is fast. Fixing is slow. And I tell my clients all the time, my job is easier than yours because we do the red team, we do the gig, we drop off the report, and we get out. Meanwhile, y'all got to fix all the things. So breaking is fast, fixing is slow, and that's that. All right, let's jump into it. Now, I realize the text over here is not very easy to read. Don't worry about it. I'm going to describe all that stuff. This is actually a screenshot, heavily obfuscated, as you can see. I can't give away the client name nor the name of the company I was working for when all this actually happened, because this was a number of years ago. So we're going to step through these steps. But this, I don't know if anybody else in here is in consulting or, has done attack chain type work like that. Anybody? I'm sure there are more complex attack chains that exist, but this one was impressive, and I still think it is. So 9 steps, as I said. So let's start talking through them. All right, the very first thing that we did, and by the way, it's important to point out that when we arrived at the client site, we were on site with the client. It was an assumed physical breach. So the client said, we're going to assume that somehow you social engineered your way into here. So we were already in the building. Other than that, all we had was Ethernet access. We took our machines, plugged them into a port. We did have an IP stack. Yeah, they gave us that. But we didn't have domain joined machines. We didn't have credentials in their Active Directory, nothing. We had layer 3 access. That was it. So starting with that, we started enumerating. We started scanning all the things to see what IP addresses were there and try and understand what network services were available, the usual sorts of things. Pardon me. I do love the sound of my own voice, but man, you get thirsty when you're talking. So we scanned around, found some HTTP services running, and if anybody is a developer in here, you might be familiar with a tool called Jenkins, as you can see up there. If you configure Jenkins by default, there's a vulnerability that will allow you in that console. Let's see if I thought there was a laser on this thing. Oh, there it is. You can see here, there is a place that you can enter commands to do things. Unauthenticated, we were not logged into Jenkins at all. That's just the page you get when you go to Jenkins. And listing 1 here shows the payload. Now, here's one of the things. I'm not going to go through exactly what this does, but running that command gave us a reverse shell on the system that was running Jenkins as the local system account. So at this point, we had pretty much full access through this reverse shell through Jenkins, and we could run commands as system. So we made a little progress. Now we've got access to this one box. And then we needed to figure out, okay, now that we've got persistence on this box through a reverse shell, what can we do with that? So, see the arrow there? We're moving on to step 2. So we continued enumerating, and we found a file server. Oh, and by the way, for those of you, I mentioned that I obfuscated all the important information. If you're not aware, if you're not a network person, that's fine. All the IP addresses you're going to see are RFC 1918 addresses, 10 dot something. Those are not routable on the internet, so it's impossible to use any of those IP addresses to figure out who these hosts are, because anybody can use 10 dot anything. So we went after the file server. And on that file server, as we were poking around, we discovered that it was running Cylance, which is a tool that's very good at what it does. It will prevent people like me from doing snarky things like scraping credentials out of system memory and a variety of other things. So Cylance is pretty good at that. But what we discovered on this particular machine on the left, it had a different policy than all the other machines that we examined. And we're like, that's interesting. By messing with that file server with the incorrect Cylance policy, we were able to execute Mimikatz. If you're not familiar with Mimikatz, it's a tool that will examine memory of a running server, and it will extract hashes that somebody has used to authenticate into that server or workstation or whatever. And because it runs in memory, Mimikatz runs in memory, Cylance normally detects it and will not allow it to execute. But again, because this policy just happened to be out of date, we were able to execute Mimikatz and extract hashes from this machine. Now, if you saw my buddy Q, his presentation, and Corey were on stage talking about some of that stuff and what you can do with hashes. So we got a little lucky on this deal. Had that device been configured properly, we wouldn't have been able to do this. However, in this industry, as many of you know, I'm sure, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. So we got lucky. Moving on to the next block, this was a little complicated because one exploit, it was actually two exploits that resulted in a third. So that's why those devices are kind of, steps 4 and 5 had to happen for us to get to step 6. So let me go into that one. Okay, so we were able to compromise all domain join servers. So when we ran Mimikatz on that file server, it wasn't domain admin, but it was a valid set of credentials that we could use to access any device that was joined to the domain in which that account lived. So there's a lot of text up there, but basically, by using that one set of credentials that we had, we achieved remote code execution on nearly 7,000 servers by scanning for SNB on port 445 with mass scan. And if you haven't used mass scan, there's a variety of ways to do this to enumerate networks. Nmap is a very popular choice. Mass scan, there's other things that are newer tools, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but mass scan will very quickly fling a lot of packets around a network. It's worth pointing out at this time that when this organization was so large that they were nervous. They knew that we were going to be doing this, so they gave us another account. They gave us access to their network monitoring system. Specifically, we wanted to watch the CPU utilization of their core routers, because as we started flinging packets around, we didn't want to interrupt this organization's business, right? So as we were scanning and flinging packets, we were watching the utilization on their routers, and that'll be an important detail in a minute. So if you can see that payload, can y'all even see that laser pointer, by the way? Yeah, you can? Okay, cool. We executed this, and again, I'm not going to go through the details, but we were able to run that and execute a command with the SNB service running, and it downloaded Mimikatz into memory to avoid antivirus. And we actually, the guy, he was sitting right next to me who ran this, he took the output of that, and he had already stood up a little file server of his own on the client's network, so he would take the output and dump it to that file for later examination. And with that, we got 1,501 unique plain text domain credentials. So huzzah, now we've got a bunch of accounts that we can play with. Moving on, so now we had more credentials that we had before. So again, this whole time we're enumerating. Oh, and when I say it was a big network, when we started off, they gave us, it was 5 or 6 Class A subnets that we could scan. They were all internal. They were all 10 dot something. But if you do the math on that, each Class A has, 16 million or so IP addresses. So there was a massive IP space. And I think we were enumerating throughout the entire engagement. Just as we would scan, I would take results that I thought were interesting, hand it over to my colleagues on the red team, and we would try and go. So it's not like we scanned multiple millions of IP addresses. It kept going on forever. So this next one is interesting. So now we had a bunch of valid credentials, and we found a system on their network called Tanium. If you're not familiar with Tanium, it's an endpoint management software. So it will sit on your network, and it'll keep track of what devices are on your network. Lots of ways to do that. In addition, Tanium would tell you things like which users were actively logged in to each device. if there were local accounts on it, what the local admin group membership was, and those sorts of things. And you can see by that query that we pasted up there, that was the query we entered: get logged in users containing what, I had to obfuscate that, from all machines. I think that was a group that had local administrator access on all devices. So the reason this is interesting, even though we were authenticated to the network at this point with valid credentials that we had taken, Tanium is any type of endpoint management software is very, very useful. But the credentials that we had were not necessarily a part of the IT team, right? This was just a normal user within this organization. And we saw this as, this is weird. This should be restricted to only people whose job it is to manage devices, as in the IT team. Everybody in this large organization had access to Tanium. So that was one of those moments, don't mind if I do. We thought it was, I don't want to say it's funny, but it's funny. We used the client's own software to gather more information about soft targets on their network. So we did a query to say who are all the administrative users, essentially, on this network. And Tanium did its job and gave us that information. So at this point, we knew about a bunch of machines on the network. We had a bunch of regular user accounts. Now we had the usernames of people that had domain admin privileges. Armed with that information, and by the way, I should back up for a second. It's not like we knew that this is how the attack chain was going to come out. Just every time we would get a little more privileged, we would just keep looking and looking for something that we could use. So that's why it took 85 days, and because every time you get a little step further, you've got to keep examining the network and trying to figure out, oh, here's some new information. Can I use that to my advantage? So now that we knew who the domain admins were, we thought, okay, that's a soft target. We need to find the computers that these domain admins use. Now, the best practice, as I'm sure you know, when you're doing just normal office work, you don't use your privileged account, right? You only use your privileged account when you're doing administrative duties. For your day-to-day stuff, you should use your non-privileged account. But we knew that if we could find the workstation of a domain admin, there was an opportunity for sensitive information being on that device, right? So that's this step number 7. We found a workstation that had been logged into and appeared to have been assigned to a domain admin. So we went to see if we could gain access. Well, we already had access to every domain joined machine, as I mentioned. So then this happened. One of my colleagues, using a couple of different tools, PSExec and Meterpreter, was able to get a reverse shell on that domain admin's workstation. And the screenshot you see there is when he basically did a dir, a listing of files that were on the desktop. If this hasn't jumped out at you already, whoops, sorry, pushed the wrong button. Where did I go? Okay, see, I tried to get clever. Those are actual files that were on this user's desktop. Look at that last one there, credentials, something, something, admin-user.csv. Okay, what do you think we did with that file? Yeah, we downloaded it in a hurry. If you're going to keep creds in plain text on your machine, first of all, shame on you. But if you are going to do that, come on, guys. Don't name it admin user. Like, that was too easy. So we downloaded that file, discovered that that CSV, that spreadsheet, had a lot of credentials. And this particular organization used a lot of virtualization, right? So this allowed us to log into their server farm and have our way with it, which we did. And that led us to the virtual server farm. as I said. So we had the admin credentials. We logged into their virtual server farm. A lot of their domain controllers had been virtualized. So when we got into the hypervisor, we saw all these DCs sitting around. There were multiple of them, so we shut down one of the domain controllers, and since it was a virtual machine, we cloned its disk and attached it to a new VM that we spun up for the purpose of mounting that volume from the domain controller, which, as we know, the domain controller has all the usernames and passwords in a file, and we were able to use that hypervisor that we spun up to start cracking passwords. So I can't show you the command line that we used to authenticate and to do all these things, but we, like I said, we gained access to a domain controller, shut it down, cloned it, spun up a new virtual machine, and used that to crack the hashes. So this is the second time during this engagement that we used the client's own resources to our benefit. The first time was with Tanium, right? We gathered information. And now the second time, we used their own virtual devices to crack hashes. So we didn't have to even bother with using our own hardware or anything. We're just like, well, we've got access to it. Why not use it? Adding a little insult to injury. So here's the listing of how we mounted the volume on of the domain controller to our new machine and used the packet to, a Python script to manipulate it further and eventually start getting hashes for administrators. That was, we already had non-privileged user accounts, so we were really interested in getting further administrative access. Remember, on the domain admin user whose account, whose workstation we accessed, it was using his non-privileged account. So we didn't yet have administrative access, but we are getting close. And finally, here is what happened. Man, y'all are still here, and I know we're all hungry. Thank you. In the very last step, we were able to log into a domain controller using some stolen credentials that we had cracked using their own virtual machine. And then, as you can see there, we connected to it, made sure we were on the right device. Cool. Probably should have taken that user out. And here it is. We had 3 business days left on the engagement. So this was like a Tuesday or Wednesday, and the gig was going to be over on a Friday. We did the net user command, added our new user to the domain, and that worked. And then at the very bottom here, yoink, you can see we added ourselves to the domain admins group. When you finally get domain admin as a consultant, you are working for the client. I find it in poor taste to say, neener, we got domain admin. However, when the client wasn't looking, we did have a big group hug because it had been a very long month of a lot of us working together, and we finally got there. So yay, and there was much rejoicing. All right, let's pause for a second. So I've talked about the level of access we had when we started, which is basically just network layer 3 access. We slowly got system level on a local box, used that to pivot to another device, and found the Silence misconfiguration, and so on and so on. So every step along the way, we just had a little bit more access. Here, if you don't remember anything from this talk, please remember this. There were lots of failures, and as I mentioned in the beginning, they were not limited to individual exploits. I mentioned to you that they gave us access to their network monitoring system, so as I was flinging packets all over the network, I was very concerned about taking down their core routers. We got to, what would I say? 20,000 packets per second, which that's That's kind of a lot. That was enough to raise the overall CPU utilization on their core routers by about 10%. That's when I got nervous. I thought, all right, a 10% increase, we probably could push it a little further, but I didn't want to. And anyway, 20K packets a second was pretty good. No one on the blue team noticed that. I was sitting there thinking, man, surely someone's going to notice, wow, every single one of our core routers just spiked by 10% for no reason. Why is that happening? We managed to evade detection, and we weren't going low and slow. Trust me when I say, I just told Mascan, like, go nuts, man, and we did. Configuration management, that Jenkins issue that I talked about, you can fix that vulnerability by changing the configuration, but if you deploy Jenkins on your enterprise in the default config, that's what's going to happen to you. So there's configuration management issues. The technical control that would have prevented us from scraping credentials out of memory was not deployed consistently. And again, we admit we got very, very lucky by finding that one device. Policy and procedure, at some point along the way, we discovered there was an awful lot of password reuse that helped us in stealing those credentials. Privileged credentials stored in clear text. Like I said, that poor admin who had that file on his desktop, just plain as day. That was against policy. And it's probably worth pointing out as well, this organization, although I can't say who they are very large and otherwise very, very sophisticated. We were surprised that we found some of these defects while we were examining them. As I mentioned, our reconnaissance included using their own management tools. Those, the Tanium product should not have been available to everybody on that network. And it ended up giving us a critical clue that we used along the way. And monitoring, so I mentioned there was 3 days left on the gig. And we created a domain admin account, and it was obnoxious. I mean, it was very obviously not an authorized domain admin account. It was clear as day. You could look at it, and, you know, it was something ridiculous like, haha, Kilroy was here, or something. You know, it's like they would have known. But 3 days later, on Friday during the readout, that account was still there, and it was still active. So we brought that up. What could the client have done differently? I mean, each step along the way, and that was in the report, I'm sure you're seeing it just as plain as day. I mean, all those things that I mentioned. Blue team, if you're a blue teamer, I get it. You have a hard job because the mail never stops coming, right? Every single day, you've got to protect your information assets. But if you're a blue teamer, it's not just about looking at the alerts in your SIM. There are other things that will give you clues about the health of your environment, and that CPU utilization of routing and switching devices is one of them. Configuration management, again, you know, if you're going to let your developers deploy that, because that first instance that I talked about, it wasn't like on a server available to a lot of people. It was installed on some workstation that a developer was using. If you're going to do that, make sure you have policies and procedures to support the appropriate config. Memory scraping, again, I mean, we were very, very lucky on that, but obviously one device didn't have the correct policy applied. And policy and procedure, no one likes policy and procedure. It's not sexy, but as it turns out, it's very, very necessary. They should not have allowed the password reuse and storing those credentials in clear text. And yeah, so there's a variety of things that the client could have done. Interestingly, during the readout, you know, so I was the team lead for that engagement. So me and my team were sitting on one side, the client sitting on the other. And there was this one gentleman throughout. If you work with clients, you know, you can read body language, right? So I'm sitting there going through the thing, using all the big words and everything. And this guy's sitting directly across from me. Just kind of looking, and I'm like, man, this cat does not want to be here. And so I got to the part about the domain admin group and was like, by the way, we checked this morning before we had this readout, and that account is still there. Oh, I forgot I had these on. See if I can get through TSA tomorrow with these. We said, hey, you might want to have a system that will monitor the membership of your domain admins group. Yeah, we have that. Like, oh, well, it didn't work. What happened? Yeah, that system went down a week ago and no one noticed. Like, oh, all right, so I don't know. Do you have to have a monitoring system for your monitoring systems? I mean, how far can that thing go? You know what I mean? But that's, if you have systems that are critical in monitoring things, somebody or some bodies need to be watching that, because they would have caught us pretty quickly had that system been running. I have not heard from that gentleman. I thought I was going to get Christmas cards and whatnot. No, he's not a big fan of mine. So, again, as I said on the outset, I think the individual exploits that I talked about are pretty interesting, and any one of them could probably be a longer form discussion. But what's really interesting is that each of them in aggregate led to us becoming domain admin on this machine. And like I said, they estimated that it was going to take them 3 years to fix all that. And again, I will close with my little catchphrase there: breaking is fast, fixing is slow. Does anyone have any comments or questions, or do y'all just want to go to lunch? Yes. Yeah.
What's your team?
Yeah, it was me and 5 or 6 other people. Yeah, me and 6 people. So that's how we got the 85 days delivered in 20 days. Yes.
So this might just be on my mind because of a talk I heard this morning. When you found the CSV file with the plain text credentials, was your team concerned at all that might have just at that point been a honeypot? And if so, how do you go forward? Like, do you just go forward and hope that it's not, or do you look at that differently if you think that it might be a honeypot?
That is a very good question. The question, well, he had the microphone. Yeah, were we concerned that it was a honeypot? Because we knew we got the host name and or IP address of that device from Tanium, it could have been a honey device anyway. It could have been planted in there for us to find it. And it's you bring up a good point. It was such an obvious and bad file name that it could have tricked us. And certainly if we had interacted with that device, a honeypot could have alerted somebody that something nefarious was going on. We took our chances and grabbed the file, and then when we, in fact, were able to log into the hypervisor to get access. So that thought did cross our mind, and to be fair, the rules of engagement for this client were that if we found something that we thought was egregiously bad, we were supposed to, ring the bell and tell leadership at the client that we did this. I felt awful because we rang the bell on that one. We said, look, dude, you got admins storing stuff like this on their desktop. That is bad. He became red in the face and left. And I'm like, look, man, as a red teamer, or if we're doing security training, the goal is never to get anybody in trouble or get anybody fired. But the manager was enthusiastically pissed when we told him that. I don't know what happened to this. I hope this person is still working there and still has a job. But anyway, great question. That thought did cross our mind, but we were pretty confident in the data that we had leading up to that. Anything else? All right. Oh, one more. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So you talked a lot about how you used internal management systems to be able to Yeah. So just based on that, is this something that you commonly do? Have you used other living off the land techniques before? And if so, what are maybe some of the more out there ones that you have used?
Let me make sure I understood you. Are you asking, so since we use the client's resources against them, is that a common tactic that we use? Is that what?
More just in terms of, do you commonly use living off the land tactics?
Yeah, yes is the answer. However, when we're doing that, it is still an opportunistic activity, right? We don't know what's out there. And so, yes, living off the land, as you say, that is a common thing, and if we can get access to that, we are going to use it. Hi.
Yes. Can you explain your coat?
Thank you, Michael. I can't. Okay, so my wife, whose handle is Seams, she is a seamstress, and we've been married. During DEF CON, we will hit 13 years of being married. But she specializes in women's clothing. Early in our relationship, I was like, honey, you got to make some clothes for me. Back 30 years ago when I was a sysadmin, I worked in a data center where it was a little chilly. So my sister went to a medical supply store and got me just a regular lab coat, which she then tie-dyed for me. So I had this tie-dye lab coat. And so my wife said, well, I don't know how to make men's clothing, but I have a pattern for a lab coat since you used to wear one. So she made this lab coat for me. And then I started, this is my walking ego wall. I have my first speaker's patch from DEF CON here. I've got my little chef emblem here. My 3 favorite flags, United States, Texas, and this one I'm told looks like the Philippine flag, but it's not. It's from a region in southern Louisiana called Acadiana. So I just decorate it, Michael, with things. And, what do I have on the back of it? Oh, yeah, this was my failed blog experiment, Security Kitchen, chef and all that. I discovered that making video blogs is an awful lot of work, and I stopped doing it. So anyway, for a decade now, I've been wearing this thing. And if I get in trouble, this is our CEO, by the way. So, hi, Mike. If you hit me up about the dress code, I'm going to have to remind you that, look, for 10 years, people recognize me because of this coat. So, it's, I am a fashion statement. Okay, maybe, yeah. Or as my wife would say, I've got a face made for radio, Anyway, y'all, it's lunchtime. Thank you very much for sitting through this. I'm Chef. I'll be around all day. Y'all are awesome. Enjoy it.